Woman of the early Christian church I can guarantee you've never heard of. But let me tell you, this woman was a freaking powerhouse and trailblazer centuries before her time. Her name? Egeria. And this is how she rocked the ancient and modern world. Every year, over 2 million people venture to the Holy Land, tracing the steps of Jesus in biblical history. Loads of folks see this pilgrimage as transformative. A whole industry is developed around it. But few people can imagine spending 3 whole years on a spiritual journey like that. And fewer still would guess that the earliest named pilgrim to the Holy Land from Europe was a woman named Egeria, who did exactly that between 381 and 384 AD, leaving us a record of what she found. But here's the crazy thing. Egeria's chronicles, while well known amongst the ancients, might have been completely lost if they weren't stumbled across in 1884 in an Italian library. So first let's talk about this idea of Christian pilgrimage, and we have to zip through this, so hold on to your butt. For the first 2 to 3 centuries of the church's existence, there was a strong belief that God was present in the world and believers through the Holy Spirit rather than physical places. And as I cover in the Ultimate Bible History for Believers course, after the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD and the city's utter obliteration by the Romans, both Judaism and the growing new faith of Jesus Christ spread far from where they had begun, and cities like Caesarea, Antioch, and Ephesus were now more important to Christian adherents. And as far as Jerusalem historic sites went, there just wasn't much there for early Christians. It was mostly newer structures on top of burned out rubble, as over 80% of the city was destroyed by the Romans. And where the Temple of Jerusalem once stood, now stood a temple to the god Jupiter. There just wasn't much in Jerusalem for early believers. But then came Constantine and the legalization of Christianity in 312-313 AD. And Constantine was big on creating places of centralized worship, and he authorized extensive building plans throughout the empire. And although Constantine never visited Jerusalem, his mother Helena was all about it, and about finding sacred sites and sacred relics. And so places such as the location of the rediscovered tomb of Christ, they had these large churches built on top of them, and soon it became an active Christian service to go and visit these places, and accounts began circulating of pilgrims venturing to and walking in the steps of the biblical writers. But it's Egeria who was the first to write thoroughly of her experiences in the Holy Land, and Egeria's trek wasn't a brief encounter. Over the span of 3 years, she traveled from her home in Spain to Egypt, Israel, and Syria, searching out these sacred places. And she meticulously documented her experiences, capturing her observations, interactions, and the profound spiritual significance of the places that she visited. And importantly, her diary, which is now called Journey to the Holy Places, provided first-hand insights into early Holy Land Christian liturgy. And one of the first sites Egeria visited was what they believed to be the Mount Sinai, where Moses received the commandments. And she described a ridiculously difficult journey up the mountain, which she undertook entirely on foot, describing her journey as straight up the whole way, as if up a wall. But she didn't stop there. Using the Bible as a compass, she journeyed across the Mediterranean, visiting places tied to patriarchs, prophets, and biblical heroes. And at each location, she engaged with local clerics to understand their customs. But what she would do is she would arrive at a site, she'd pray, she'd read a Bible verse, she'd sing a psalm, and then she would offer a concluding prayer. And then she'd record what would happen in her journal, offering a direct snapshot into the faith and rituals of early Christians that otherwise would have been lost to time. And for Egeria, these sacred sites she visited were more than just geography, right? They were extensions of her understanding of the biblical narrative, giving her a deep dive into the scriptures that very few at the time had access to. And she also took a detour to visit the shrine of Thecla in Seleucia. And if you know your early women of the Christian faith, this visit was a big deal. Because if you don't know anything about Thecla, wow, that's a video for another time. But from Egeria's writings, the story of Thecla obviously had a tremendous impact on her own journey. And the accounts of both women reveal they weren't just observers of their faith, they ardently pursued experiences enriching their spiritual insights, often pioneering the way. But what's truly beautiful about Egeria's diary is that it debunks these modern notions about women in antiquity. Egeria actively engaged with the world around her, and it helps us redefine our perception of women in ancient Christian history. She was bold, daring, and even willing to challenge preconceived traditional notions of Christian women then and now, 1600 years later. She went to prominent biblical sites like Mount Nebo, where Moses met his end, and Haran, home to Job's tomb, and Abraham's house. But it was Egeria's time in Jerusalem That was the highlight of her pilgrimage, offering an invaluable view into 4th century Jerusalem and its Christian worship. And Egeria's accounts did more than just document her journey. They influenced Christian liturgy. Her descriptions, particularly of Holy Week, left a lasting mark on worship traditions, many of which still endure today, 1600 years later. Egeria's writings also offer a rare glimpse into early Christian practices like baptism. Through her eyes, we see how the church emphasized personal righteousness, community testimony, and a thorough evaluation before welcoming new believers through baptism. Egeria, she's a big deal, folks, and most of us have never heard her name. This woman blazed a literal trail across the Holy Land that people are still following today, and she gives us a look into ancient liturgical practices that would have otherwise been lost. And if her story has stirred something inside of you, just to let you know, this month I'm again offering my 3-hour workshop called by God, Women Leaders of the Early Christian Faith, absolutely free. And to register and download, just go right here. And in this workshop, we transport ourselves back to the early days of Christianity, where women were foundational to the faith and anything but silent. A time when courageous women like Mary Magdalene, one of the 3 named financiers of Jesus' ministry, became the first to proclaim his resurrection. Fatini, the Samaritan woman at the well, who became a legendary leader that confronted the Emperor Nero face to face. Women such as Lydia, Phoebe, Priscilla, Eunia, Nympha, Thecla, Perpetua, Egeria, and many more. Women who not only overturned the cultural norms of their eras, but were instrumental in forging the early Christian movement. These spiritual mothers had a profound influence and spiritual legacy amongst early Christians that's been overshadowed for centuries, and in some cases, and for various reasons, were almost lost to time. And in this workshop, we bring their stories to light and acknowledge their critical roles in shaping early Christian history. And for October, you can just click here and join in. So God bless. You are loved. See you.